Presentation on modern day mining best practices. Sounds excellent. Looking really forward to Jill Shackelford, mining consultant, to present on this.
Thank you,
All right,
guys.
Jill, just let me know when you're ready to move from slide to slide.
Okay, great. I appreciate it. It's an honor to join your call today. I want to give a thank you to Anton for inviting me, and also for the CREAM organization up in Williamson County, the Coalition for Responsible Environmental Aggregate Mining. We had done a panel together in Williamson County that kind of prompted this invite. So just appreciate it. I'm going to give you a little bit of bits and pieces of that presentation, leaving some time for Q&A at the end of this. But a little bit about me. I was in the mining business in Hayes County. I went to Texas Tech University. I'm from Austin, and I graduated from Tech and entered my family's asphalt paving business, where I got bored about day 2. And so I decided I was going to go on the manufacturing side of things. And I opened an asphalt plant, and soon opened another asphalt plant and a sand mining operation to make asphalt to sell to my father's company. And then I did kind of ventured off into the world of mining, which became an education in itself. And I'll share some of my story with you. But basically, I leased a cattle ranch outside of Buda, in Hayes County, not far from the Salt Lick. You probably know where that is. And began the mining process. And what unfolded after that is really the biggest part of my story. I under-anticipated the concerns, the opposition, and this presentation today will be sort of a tell-all of what came out of that, and the really good things and the lessons learned and the mistakes I made along the process. And I think it'll give you guys some real world experience. If you've got a mining operation in your jurisdiction, some questions you should be able to ask very transparently. So I hope you'll get that out of this presentation. Anton's going to run the slideshow for me because I can't multitask. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I was asked up in Williamson County, when I owned my quarry, what were the successes and challenges of upgrading the equipment? What I did and what you'll learn today is we were mining over the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards Aquifer, and groundwater was a major concern for my neighbors and constituents, along with your typical mining challenges of dust, traffic, truck traffic, blasting, and things like that. I'm going to tailor this more towards dust today because I think this air quality is your mission. So I chose some dry technology out of Europe to eliminate the need for groundwater, since we were mining on the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer. And with that came some real successes and some real challenges. So I'll get into that here in a minute. But one of the biggest things that came out of my operation there was the formation of an advisory panel. I plugged in about 10 of the most concerned citizens, and we sat down at a table and began communicating very transparently on my operation. And I figured out real quickly that they weren't really mad at me as a person. They were more mad at my mining operation that went next to their neighborhood. And so that was probably my biggest challenge. You can go to the next slide. So when I speak a lot these days, I tell anyone, whether you're a regulator or a mining operator or a neighbor, it's never too late to do the right thing. And so that's what prompted me to just stop and form the advisory council and do some of these BMPs, best management practices, that I'm going to talk to you today about. Next slide, please. I say the war was on. I had organized opposition. You can see the Stop the Crusher sign, and then welcome to Ruby Ranch. Ruby Ranch was the neighborhood in Hayes County that I was next to. It was a very high-end neighborhood that was there before me. I leased the land, and I thought I had plenty of buffer zone, to be able to mine there. And I was within all the regulations, but the war and the organized opposition that came out of this was, it really took me by surprise. Next slide, please. So some of the things I ended up doing, long story short, and feel free to quiz me on this later, but one of the main things we did right off the bat was preserve vegetation and trees. And I can't tell you what that did to mitigate dust. I can't record it because it was so significant. We left a lot of green space. in addition to buffer zones and things that might have been required by the TCEQ at the time, we implemented a lot more just voluntary BMPs, which I'm a big proponent of those. And I would encourage you, if you're in Hayes County or Kyle or Austin, wherever you are, if you've got a mining operation next to you, whether it's crushed aggregate or cut stone, ask them the question, can they please leave more vegetation? Because you don't have to strip the entire site when you begin mining. This is a picture of the road we built and the vegetation that we left. Next slide, please. This is a picture of my quarry, which is the actual hole in the ground that we had developed by blasting. We started off slowly with a permit by rule issued by the TCEQ that was a maximum of 200 tons per hour. That enabled me to get in there and open up the hole. But what we did to mitigate dust, which was not required, was we covered our conveyors. You can see the silver lining on top of those conveyor belts. And that was just a great way to suppress dust. It dramatically reduced our emissions, and we proved that out by testing. So that's just one view of the covered conveyors. And the dry technology I mentioned earlier, what that was, typically in my industry, if you're washing aggregates, you're using a lot of water, hundreds of millions of gallons a month. And this enabled us to go dry. And so this plant actually did not like water. For production, for washing the rock, we were actually sucking the dust off with vacuum type operations that were enclosed in an air cylinder chamber that would basically suck the dust off the rock instead of washing it. And so that eliminated our need for groundwater, which was a victory for everyone that was concerned with my operation. You can go to the next slide. This is just another view of those covered conveyors. And you can see that picture right there. There's not really a lot of dust or particulate matter in the air. We were running at the time, but because the entire system was closed off, covered, we just didn't have a lot of dust. And, the stockpiles were moist. That's another BMP, is just keeping everything moist with either misters or light groundwater spray with a water truck. Again, we weren't using groundwater because of the concerns. We were bringing in water from the city of Buda. But I like to share that photo because if you drive by a quarry that's very dusty, it just doesn't have to be that way these days. And that's why I call it modern day mining. Mining in the past is changed. It's evolved. A lot of the areas, including where my operation was, it's not as rural as it used to be. The population grows, especially in Hayes County and Williams, that I'd say the two I'm most familiar with right now. You're just not as far out as you used to be. And so you really need to respect your neighbors. And, it is a safety concern too, if you've got a lot of dust tracking onto your road or just in the air in general. And so if you see a dusty site, you should make a phone call. Don't feel bad if you call the TCEQ, because a good mining operator respects concern and phone calls. Typically I see people that just are stonewalling you or shut you down. That's usually a red flag. You can go to the next slide. Another thing that we did was we enclosed our rock crusher in a building. This was definitely for dust emissions, but it also helped with noise. And so the truck that's loaded with shot rock right there, he's backing into the rock crusher. That's our primary crusher, but it was in a building and it was closed on 3 sides. And so that was pretty innovative back at the time. And I've mentioned to some of you, Christina with Cream in particular, I used to be kind of quiet about the BMPs that I implemented because it was a personal decision. But today's mining environment is very different. Like I said, we're not as rural, and I think it's really important to implement these BMPs. And I would say that, what the TCEQ establishes, and I'm a big proponent of the TCEQ, I think a lot of people sometimes confuse them with needing to be a PR agency. That is not their role. Their role is to protect the environment. And what they do, in my opinion, is really a baseline for an operator. And that should just set the bar for you're going to go above and beyond, what's required by a regulatory agency. Okay, next slide. Again, I can't stress the need for vegetation. You can see the grass we left, the trees. You can see the silt fence on the other side of the berm. Those berms where we were under the Edwards program of the Edwards Aquifer for TCQ, we had an engineered berm on site. It was compacted, it was seeded, it had vegetation on it, and that was a great dust mitigation project. But then we had the silt fence on the other side of it for runoff, and then we just left as much vegetation as we could between our mining operation that was going on and our neighbors or our property line. We only cleared as we needed to clear. I see a lot of mining operators these days, they'll go and they'll clear the whole site. And so it's just stripped of vegetation. And that's where you really get into a dust problem. Next slide. So the closed system that I told you about that I chose in lieu of groundwater washing my aggregate, you can see the box at the end of that conveyor belt. That's finished product that we were making. And that on the bottom side of that box is a very fine mister spray. And so the material coming out, I said the plant doesn't like water. It didn't like water to wash the rock, but we had misters on the end of the belts to control dust at that drop point. And what that did was just really mitigate any dust that would leave our property, leave that stockpile in particular, and just gave it a fine mister cover of water really to just keep that dust down. Next slide. So Heather Beatty is a friend of mine. She used to run the Edwards Aquifer program for TCEQ. She was part of this Williamson County presentation that I'm pulling bits and pieces of today. And I just want to mention some of the BMPs that she suggested, and a big one is, vegetation and revegetating. When we mine, we clear, and then you can come back and you can plant and seed. And so it really doesn't hinder your production. So next slide, please. And you can go on to the next one. And so some of the best management practices that Heather pointed out and that I was actually regulated by because I was on the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards, is just your planning is important. We paved our road, we left trees, we left vegetation, we reseeded, we had buffer zones, we did environmental projects in addition to what was required. She mentions buffers. That's definitely protection against streams and groundwater and karst features. We didn't want any dust going down through those features and getting in the aquifer. We preserved as much topsoil as we could. We stabilized our haul roads. We actually paved our haul roads, the main one coming in, which is almost 2 miles long. And then we would keep our active haul roads watered with a water truck. One of the big, things she also mentioned was your care of your construction vehicles and equipment. We actually built a pad to service our equipment on, and we brought in mobile fuel instead of storing it out there on the Edwards. So these are just some good BMPs that I think everyone benefits from. And then always doing inspections. You might have a 30-day threshold that you're required to inspect. We would take that down to a weekly or daily basis just for risk management. And you can go to the next slide. I was asked, what recommendations or suggestions do you have for residents of Williamson County? I'm just going to put this out there for wherever you're located or wherever you have operators in your vicinity. If people are experiencing nuisance, here's what I learned. My neighbors were calling me, and I'll mention like backup alarms they were calling me on a regular basis about those backup alarms. And I would just encourage you, if someone's calling on a regular basis, they're likely not making it up. And I learned that lesson the hard way. And so when I switched out our backup alarms to the white noise or the backup alarms that beep, quack like a duck, my complaint calls basically went away. And so my recommendation is, for any residents, I would say call, you need to have a voice. And then for regulators or, all you guys that are in cities and counties, I think you have a right to call that mining operator and ask them a few questions. And like I said, a good mining operator won't be defensive or, be insulted that you're calling. You can go to the next slide. And this is going to be, so Anton was asking me, I just want to give you all some real world experiences of what I've done, what I think are really, I know if I can do them, pretty much anybody can do them that's in that industry. And so one of my clients is Martin Marietta. I have a lot of respect for Martin Marietta. I'm actually working with Cream right now up in Williamson County. We're doing an advisory council with Martin Marietta. And so we've got their executives and plant managers, environmental team at the table with a group of concerned residents from the area and also some elected officials. And so I want to kind of tell you what they have indicated to me that they're doing and what I know that they're doing. You can go to the next slide. And so opacity, I mean, you guys know opacity is really, you know, how much dust is blocking light. So if you're looking up in the sky and it's clear, you don't really have any opacity. If there's no light, you've got really dirty air. And so Martin Marietta is really good about their opacity testing. The TCEQ requires it. It's different for each permits, but a lot of the times it's typically done at startup when you're first getting going in a mining operation. That gives you a baseline of your opacity. You know, they're doing this quarterly. That's totally voluntarily on their part, but all it does is just help us mitigate dust. And so, you know, they're big on routine inspections, not less than monthly. Some of these inspections are only required quarterly or annually. And so if you back everything up to a monthly basis, it's just, again, you know, being a better steward. So I want to give Jason Reed, he's the vice president of operations, a plug for sending these along because, you know, this is something they're doing, but it would benefit everybody. You go to the next slide. So another thing is I mentioned the water truck. We did that at our site. We actually had 2 water trucks running. They're running theirs every single day, you know, and then they're keeping a log of the road, how clean it is or how dusty. One of the things you'll see in mining operators, you shouldn't see, but you might see dust tracking out onto the roadway, and that can become a hazard. I know Cream pointed out to me there's a cut stone operation up in Williamson County that was actually cited by the TCEQ for tracking dust onto the road. And I think that's really good. I mean, we won't want that going on. And so some of the things you can do to eliminate that is pave your entrance, which we did. That's what they're doing. Identify and manage the traffic patterns. That's really important. You know, if trucks are constantly going back and forth on the same route, it can get really dusty. So if you have an entrance and exit route, that helps. Wheel washes. Those are really important. Getting those tires wet before they get onto the public road, you know, just mitigates dust tracking. Mats, rumble strips, all these things just really mitigate dust. And then if water is a concern, which is a huge concern right now everywhere, the TCEQ has approved some eco-friendly dust suppressant products that you can actually put down on your surface, whether it's your haul roads or actually in the pit where you're mining. And those do a real good job of mitigating that dust. It kind of keeps it stuck to the surface. And those are usually a water-based polymer or like a calcium chloride solution. And I have information if anybody needs that. A big thing is stockpile and equipment distance from operations and property lines. That's really important. I mean, I've seen some situations where people have got these massive stockpiles and they're right on their property line and they're just a mess and they blow. It's windborne dust. And so, you know, like a 45-foot maximum on a stockpile, I think is what TCEQ requires. And that's there for a reason. You know, the higher you get, the wind gets higher and that dust can move properties. You can go to the next slide, please. There's that 45-foot. And then transfer point controls. That was the mister I showed you guys with the water coming off the end of the belt. Again, water or a light fog to just capture that airborne dust. It really helps. And it's, you know, it's not a very large volume of water that you're using. It's very minimal. Enclosures, you saw my rock crusher, the actual crusher was in a building. Enclosures all over the plant are very popular these days with good operators. And it's just something that we do today. It's not like we're mining back in the 1900s, you know, where you were very rural and you just don't necessarily have to have that. Times have definitely changed. Throughput restrictions, you know, if you don't have to run 1,000 tons an hour and you can run 500 and you're still productive, you know, the less we're running, especially in an open air facility, the less dust we'll have. That one can be a little bit challenging, but I'm seeing a lot of that and it's working really well. I'm a big proponent on electricity versus diesel, again, for emissions, not necessarily dust, but it just clouds the air. And then they're doing a lot of visual screening and wind screening. So just really trying to set up their property where they have wind breaks, where they can really kind of get a handle on the wind patterns. Maybe it's not perfect, but they can pretty much tell what direction the wind is prevalently coming from, and kind of building your operations around that. So for instance, on my site, a lot of the wind was northwest. And so we would kind of put our stockpiles in a little different area where it wasn't in the prevailing wind pattern. You go to the next slide. And then I'd just like to say, ending it so we have time for some Q&A is, I can't express enough on vegetation, trees, they just capture so much dust, and it's just a great thing to do for your neighbor. Especially if you don't have to come in and strip the whole site, have a little respect for your neighbor, and those kind of things go a long way, and they're proven. And so even if you've having to strip the land to clear it and get ready to mine, come back with some vegetation. We actually replanted trees at my site, and often we use those as projects for Eagle Scouts or other organizations that needed a project. And so I think the whole moral to this presentation is, it's what I learned by all the people that were concerned about my operation, is the things that we implemented, and really the good input that folks had. And, if I can do that, I think, anyone that's in business should be able to do it. So, with that, I'll let you guys ask me some questions, and I'm always available for Q&A. I do a lot of this around the state right now.
Hi, Jill. My name is Kathy. I am in the city of Kyle. I just want to say thank you so very much. I actually worked in the office with Heather Beatty, so she's a great person. I never did Edwards Aquifer, but I did stormwater and water quality and waste. And so I actually, during my tenure at TCQ, when I was there, I went out to a couple of mining operations, and it was very disheartening. I mean, I took photos, and the trees around the area, literally, you'd look back at those photos and they were black and white.
Yeah.
They did not, and they were, live oak trees, and, and you just feel really bad for the people that do live nearby, because, they are being impacted. So I really appreciate your presentation. I appreciate the efforts you're making, and I'm glad that you're a consultant now for mining, because, again, that was over 10 years ago when I was in that program. So I'm glad to see that things are moving in a different direction.
Well, I appreciate that. And Heather was a big resource to us. Once I sold my company and I was kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do, I actually sat on Hill Country Conservancy's board, because they partnered with me on my site, which is things mining operators can do, to kind of mitigate and find that balance of industrial activity and conservation. And so if there's any, if everyone would run their quarry like it's on the aquifer, particularly the Barton Springs segment, I think we'd have just a lot cleaner environment. But, I appreciate your feedback. I sold my company in 2011. So I probably just missed you at that point, but I definitely get around a lot now. So feel free to contact me anytime.
Again, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I think that boils, Jill, this is Jim Stevens with Clean Air Force. I think it boils down to being a good corporate neighbor. Dirt work construction company, heavy equipment construction company, we did a lot of job sites, hazardous materials cleanups. And when we went in with visibility, communicating with the people in the city and the neighborhoods, and then show initiatives like planting trees and coming back and monitoring and keeping the dust down, we actually won an award for a town where we had a major hazmat cleanup because of all of our proactive actions. So I agree with you. Excellent presentation. I'd like to talk to you later about maybe you presenting at one of our meetings.
Sure, absolutely. And I appreciate it. Like I told you, in the beginning, I had an environmental consulting firm that was really just guiding me. I was in the regulations, far within. It's my permit, it's my land. And I'm a very big advocate now that that thinking has to change. It's not like it used to be. Kyle is a perfect example. Kyle's exploding. If I'm opening a new mine in Kyle right now, it's gonna be very different than if I opened one 50 years ago. And so if you go in and just do the right thing from the beginning, it really makes a huge difference. And I advise my clients now, if they're going to go in and open a new quarry, I usually get 2 phone calls. Somebody wants to start a quarry or somebody wants to shut one down. And so there's usually not ever in between. And if we're doing a new quarry, we're going to go in, we're going to do the right thing from the beginning. We're going to plug in folks like you to help us run a clean site. in clean air. And then, anything else we can do, immediately sit down at the table and form a panel of people that are going to be engaged in the operation before we ever apply for one permit. And I just think everybody comes out a lot better in that method. So congratulations on you for actually implementing that kind of thing.
This is
It looks like
Amanda.
yeah.
Oh, I have one little quick question. I just want to, again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing for best management practices. And I was so excited while you were talking and listening. One of the things that you said, and I just wrote it down and quoted it, you wrote, prove that out by testing. And I'm not sure exactly what that was. I just wrote it down. I was so excited. But do you have like monitors or sensors or something? When you're saying prove that out by testing, it must mean that you've like had some sort of like methodology to test. And can you just remind me what machines or sensors you were using for that?
Yeah, and so I'd say a couple of things about proven by testing is, number one, we noticed a huge reduction in our emissions when we put those enclosures on those conveyors. And that was before we even went really dry, which we weren't using groundwater. That's a whole nother level of, conserving a resource. But, we had a guy come out and do some modeling on our property. And so we had what we were doing, which was a very minimal amount. We're only operating at 200 tons an hour. But when we ramped up to 1,000, when I did get my air permit from the TCQ, then we went back kind of backwards, and we enclosed the crusher, we enclosed the conveyors, and then we remodeled, and those numbers came drastically down. And again, running the water truck, there are tools you can use, whether they're official monitors or visual monitors, to see your dust emissions reduce.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll ask a couple questions from the chat, and then we'll need to move to the next topic. And I want to thank Jill for joining us. She'll be presenting to the elected officials at the Clean Air Coalition meeting in a couple weeks. So, if you want to learn more, I'm sure there will be additional question and answers at that meeting as well. But before I let you go, question from the chat is, what type of response do you typically get from mine operators to these practices?
So I used Mark Marietta for a reason. They're one of the largest companies in the world in mining, and they're doing things all over the country. And now they're doing things with us in particular up in Williamson County. And a good operator, I see this all the time. A good operator usually gives you a good response. They don't care about just doing what's required by the agency. They're going to go above and beyond, and they're going to use that as just a baseline. That's what I'm required to do, but I'm going to implement all these better practices because, number one, selfishly, it reduces the complaint calls, so that it keeps them from being interrupted. And then number two, it just shows their good faith effort being in the neighborhood, so to speak. And so primarily from good operators, I get a good response. The only time I ever get someone negative is someone that's usually has a lot of violations, or is, I see things, if they're kind of breaking the regulation in one area, they're breaking it somewhere else, and they're pretty consistently operating not up to par. And so overall, good operators, good response. Not so good operators, they get defensive, which I told you is a red flag. And as your elected officials or staff members, you need to look for that.
And do you get like pushback based on the cost of these best management
That's a great
practices?
Question. Yeah. And I told you I had been silent on the most expense I had was going dry. I went to Europe, found that technology. It cost me probably $3 million to implement that technology, but it saved groundwater, and that mine will be running for the next 50 years. So overall, I don't think it was a big expense. I think it was a small investment over time, but that was really worth it. So most of the ones I mentioned to you today, vegetation, water truck, water misters, all that is minimal cost. It's minimal cost. And I know that because I did it.
And then one more from the chat is, do you have any numbers about the projected % PM reductions from adding vegetation? Do you know any studies or any kind of numbers that we could cite?
I need to check with my modeling guy. I can get you guys some information on that. I don't have any off the top of my head. But again, those windbreaks, in the bigger, the tree lines and things like that definitely minimize your wind blown dust. And so, for me, that would have been minimizing the dust that I was creating that was going into the neighborhood next to me. And so if there's not a study out there, I would challenge you guys, let's put one together. But I appreciate the question. And I will tell you, for my next presentation in a couple of weeks, feel free to send me anything you guys want me to elaborate on, or, spend more time on, or anything like that. Cause I'm completely open to anything. And I appreciate y'all.
We have one hand raised. So one last quick question. Christina, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Jill has done a great job with the companies that are willing to engage and have discussions, but we have some number of quarries that I would label as bad actors up here in Williamson County, where they're only interested in the bottom line. How can they maximize their profits? And it's unfortunate because TCEQ will go out there multiple times with violations. They'll pay some, little fine, 10,000, 20, very little changes. And then there's a lawsuit ongoing right now in Williamson County to hold one of these bad actors to account, because basically TCEQ has not been very effective in getting them to clean up what they do. And so that'll go to trial in July. And we're hoping that may set a precedent that some of these bad actors will realize that they can't get away with this, with repeated, terrible nuisance dust and other things that they do to the neighbors.
Yeah. And Anton, if I could say one more thing quickly, I know there's here from TCQ, the TERP program, the emissions reductions program. We did all that, and I failed to mention it, but I love that program. And so it enabled us to replace older equipment that was emitting whatever into the atmosphere with new equipment. And that was just a great program. And I encourage all my clients to go talk to the TCQ and get in their TERP program. It is a good program. So anyway, thank you guys. And Anton has my contact information if anybody needs it.